Hello and welcome back in. I am Greg Smith, recruiting extraordinaire of Hail Varsity. I am joined by staff writer Steve Mark, also of Hail Varsity. And you are watching the recruiting question of the week video. As you may or may not notice, you probably do. I am not Aaron Sorensen welcoming us in to this video. Aaron is off at an undisclosed location, enjoying some time off, well deserved. Her first vacation, who knows how many years. Steve, how are you this morning?
Hello, Greg. I'm doing great. Trying to get through this 30-ish degree weather we have right now. So yeah, it's been fun.
Now, wait a second. You guys all told me that it was fine to have that cold weather snap. Remember when I was complaining that the cold weather winter was coming? And so now it now gotten too cold that we're past quarter zip season into full on hat and glove season, and now you're upset too.
No, as a fellow Game of Thrones fan, winter has arrived.
It's definitely here.
No, I listen. I am a fan of all the seasons in Nebraska. I'm a native Nebraskan. I lived through all of them. Throw it all at me. I've lived through it. So yeah, it's fine. A little snow on the ground, whatever. I'll go about my day.
Okay, I listen. You can keep that. Like on your side of town, we can put all the snow over there. I'm already over it. If you've been in Nebraska, hopefully everybody stayed warm. Or if you're watching this from Nebraska, hopefully everybody stayed warm over the weekend. It got a little chilly. Winter finally got here. It had to come at some point. But you were not here for weather talk. You were here for the recruiting question of the week, which comes courtesy of our good buddy LED on Twitter, who had this. He had this as his question. QBs, QBs, QBs. Instead, let's talk about the lifting of the dead period. What does the schedule look like for the Huskers starting next month? Are there any future JUCO or high school signees on the horizon? And so first, I want to give you a couple of dates that are important here as we kind of get oriented, as everybody kind of returns to work, returns off of vacation, starts to get less time with family as we move along and the holidays are over. First date that you should know, January 9th seems to be the report date for Nebraska's new players, at least. That's what they've been telling me as they've committed. And I've talked to them for the different stories that we've done on hailvarsity.com. And so it seems like winter conditioning will get started around that January 9th time. The second date that you need to know and keep in mind is really important. It is January 14th. That is the weekend that Nebraska and other schools can start hosting official visitors again. And then actually a third date to keep in mind is January 18th. It keeps throwing me off because it's the day after Martin Luther King Day. January 18th is a little later than normal. That's when Nebraska's second semester starts, which is also important for the reason that for the position group that LED didn't want us to touch on, but I'm going to start by talking about it here a little bit. When we start to think about priorities for Nebraska, quarterback has to be mentioned, and we'll get away from it here in a second, but I want to first say that those dates are really important for the quarterback situation, because I don't know if we may get news this week about Nebraska's quarterback situation. You never know, but we do have a couple of benchmarks in there. That January 14th weekend would be really important if Nebraska doesn't have a quarterback at that point, to see who comes on campus. And then that January 18th date is when Nebraska absolutely will want to have someone in place that's a new quarterback or two if they go that route, because they're going to want that guy here for all of second semester. Steve, are there any other important things that you think are happening in this timeline as we are in the run up to the early sign, or to the early sign? I'm so used to saying early signing period, to the traditional signing date in February.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Like if you don't say quarterback, I mean, you're just wrong. There's out of all the positions on the football field, like the quarterback is the most obvious. Like they are the most important position on the field. The dude has ball in his hands every single play. But outside of the quarterback talk, it's got to be on the offensive line, right? The center position is just a glaring hole right now that needs to be figured out. I remember Scott Frost in one of his Sports Nightly appearances, he said that, Nori could play that back there. He has a backup experience. Ethan Piper, Trent Hickson, those type of players have experience playing the center position. But I think if you say those three names, the fan base is going to have like a collective eye roll all together. You kind of want a little bit more, maybe some new blood in there, something like that from the transfer portal. But yeah, just the offensive line in general, I think is just a issue right now that, for a first year head coach and Donovan Raiola coming from the Chicago Bears, he has a big task ahead of him of just kind of seeing who he can coach up, seeing who he can find in the transfer portal. He's already got two additions, and Kevin Wilson Jr. from Northern Colorado from the FCS level, and then Hunter Anthony just recently from Oklahoma State, fresh off his bowl appearance. He
right.
Publicly committed on social media to Nebraska. So the offensive line is by far, I think, just the biggest, most glaring question right now for the Huskers.
Yeah, there's a lot of puzzle pieces there for a first time, like full-time coach and Donovan Raiola to figure out, right? Is you've got to figure out, like, and I was like just thinking through this, like he has to have kind of introduction meetings with his guys. He's also got to watch film of those guys and make a judgment, because he needs to figure out what he then needs to go after in the high school ranks, the JUCO ranks, the transfer portal. He also needs to watch their film to see who could potentially, if anyone on the roster, become that center guy that is going to move into that role after Cameron Jurgens left for the NFL early. And so that's where I am interested. And I'm with you. I do think that there would be a collective eye roll. It was a collective eye roll when Scott Frost said, hey, here's a bunch of guys that are on the roster that could just slide into that role. Because partly, I think, it doesn't necessarily have to do with those guys as players as much as it has to do with the perception that under Scott Frost, Nebraska has just kind of pushed the center position not to the side, but has not been laser focused on developing centers in the program, because in theory, they shouldn't really be in a situation where Cam Jurgens leaves the program and they have no one else that has snapped like on the roster, right? Besides whoever's been the backup center in practice, which we don't know, like, because it never really comes up, and that's not necessarily abnormal, but it just doesn't feel like there's been a pipeline, like pun intended, of centers to come through the program, right? Even how you got to Cam Jurgens was a little bit odd, right? In the way that even happened. And so I am curious if any of those guys or someone else like a Turner Corcoran, who I think is poised to be the new leader of that offensive line, if he can slide into that role to then allow you to then move some pieces around. Because one thing that I do like about both Hunter Anthony and Kevin Williams Jr. coming in is both of them can play different positions. I don't think either of them are necessarily center prospects, but can play either guard or tackle spot, right? So that gives you a lot of flexibility as you're kind of figuring things out. And I do think that's to me the most important person of this offseason is Donovan Raiola. And then I think the other thing that needs to be addressed, and I'll have a real close eye on this, because I think that running back, and not just what happens with the running backs on the roster, but the running back coach is going to be really important here over the coming days and weeks, right? Is that Nebraska obviously does not have a running backs coach right now, and they need to figure that out. I think it's the prime opportunity to go outside of the program and try and make a splash hire in that regard. And then if that's able to be accomplished by Scott Frost, then do you add one more running back? Does that guy, like we saw with Mickey Joseph with Dakotas Crawford, your favorite player, like, does he get to, like, can that running backs coach bring someone over that he had a previous relationship with, right? Or how does that person then evaluate the room that they have? Because there's young players in the running back room that I think most people would agree have promise, but also would agree that there's no one that separated themselves from the pack either.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I guess you could call maybe Ramir like the leader of that group, but was he really exciting the fan base that much? Like, to me, he's a hard runner, but at the end of the day, like, I love the guy, but at the end of the day, he's 5'10", 185-pound running back, running in the heart of Big Ten defenses. It's like, do you think that a guy like Ramir Johnson can last the entire season? I'm not really sold on that yet. But just the transfer portal has changed so much. Even today, while we're recording this, two really good, talented running backs that I've watched kind of afar, off and on. Kai Thomas at Minnesota, that freshman, he just entered his name in the portal a couple minutes ago. Before him, Christian Beal-Smith from Wake Forest. He's a solid guy who has a couple years under his belt of starting experience. He entered the portal also. So another thing is going to be, this staff's ability to judge and wait, and how long do they want to wait, because new names are going to be popping up
Right.
all the time here. I mean, you have to have your head on a swivel. You need to have, like, members of your staff just monitoring this transfer portal, and just because these names are popping up left and right, you got to be quick on these guys because they're not going to last. Guys like Kai Thomas, like I mentioned, from Minnesota, I don't think his phone's got to be ringing off the hook, because I loved what he showed at Minnesota as a first year running back. So yeah, it's just going to be really interesting going down this stretch here with how they choose to fill that running back coaching role at Nebraska with, and what they want to do with Ron Brown, because I know Ron Brown has been here for a very, very long time, and Scott Frost really, really respects him and what he brings as kind of the analyst behind the scenes guy. So does Scott, want to keep him there, or maybe slide him in and kind of take some of that away, I guess, when he has the full-time running backs coaching job. So, it's just going to be interesting, and I can't wait to cover it all.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see it all unfold. I think there'll be plenty of news between now and the February signing period. I do think, to answer like one of the specific questions, I do think that Nebraska will go after more high school talent. I don't think that there will be a ton of traction necessarily with new high school names. Maybe if Nebraska can find, and it kind of depends on what happens with the rest of these coaching positions too, and who is new coming into the program. That changes the focus a little bit as well. But I could see Nebraska trying to swing for the fences with a couple of positions, especially running back,
Yep.
maybe wide receiver, a couple others, defensive back, maybe even. I could see that. And so there's going to be plenty. I think that we've got a lot yet to cover that's going to happen here between now and the February signing period. Aaron and I had been talking, for weeks now, that we thought that the late signing period was going to have more importance for Nebraska this time around than it had been in previous years, with the early signing period being kind of the big thing. And I think that we are going to see that. It's just going to be a little different than we maybe thought, because it's going to have transfer portal stuff kind of included in that. But we'll kind of see how it goes. Like you said, I think it's going to be fun to cover and see how it unfolds. But make sure that you guys are tuning in to hailvarsity.com tonight. I'll be doing a deeper dive into this topic like I do every Monday. The recruiting notebook is appointment reading. Make sure you check it out every Sunday through Thursday, where I dive into recruiting topics. Oftentimes the ones that don't get answered in this video still pop up, and I try to make sure to give you guys credit when that pops up as well. I love that you guys keep that conversation going in the YouTube comments as well. And Steve, I'll have to corral you to get you back on here next week to talk more recruiting news, because by the time next week rolls around, we could have a quarterback, you could have new position coaches. Who knows what's going to happen? But that's always the fun thing about this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It keeps you on your toes, and I guess that's a good way to live life, just like ready for anything. So here we go.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next week.